Shanas Yaakov Tzolo V'Somecho V'Yisomyach Atcheres Mordechai Shanas Yaakov Tzolo V'Somecho V'Yisomyach Atcheres Mordechai Shuasom, Shuasom Oy Salon Netzach Shuasom, Shuasom Oy Salon Netzach Shuasom, Shuasom Oy Salon Netzach V'Sifvasom B'chol Doi V'Doi.
Hello everyone. I'd like to deal with the ideal timing for the Seudat Purim versus the real timing. The Ramah says in Shulchan Aruch, "Menahagim lasot Seudat Purim la'achar mincha." First daven mincha, because on a regular day you should not have a big meal before you daven mincha. If your meal is in the afternoon, and most of the Seudah should be during the day of Purim. Namely, you shouldn't start a minute before Shkia and then eat the Seudah. However, there's another custom. Trumat Hadeshen comes along and says, Rabotai v'ani acharihem, all my Rabbeim and me, nahignan ikara seudah b'shacharit, ekemedu b'shekei nahagu b'rainis. Both in Rainis, my Rabbeim and me, we do the Seudah in the morning. And the Shlo, coming from a different school of thought, but also from Ashkenaz, says, V'chol mi shemagdimu mezarez b'yoter la'asot ha'seudah b'hashkama, u'meshubach b'einai. Quoting the Trumat Hadeshen, he comes along and says it's better to do the Seudah in the morning because kings eat during the morning hours, and therefore it's better to have it earlier in the day, just like that meal that Esther had for the king, for Achashverosh. And this was the practice of the Gra. Seudat Purim mikara bayom, al ken anachon lechaven b'seudah shacharit. He did the Seudah right after Shachris. That was the practice of my Rebbe Rav Lichtenstein, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, and therefore, as long as you do the Seudah during the day, and make sure the majority of it is during the day. So, from within my safe room at home, and this particular year in Israel, if indeed you're going to be more homebound than a usual Purim, there's absolutely no problem to do the Seudah in the morning. There's absolutely no problem to have a brunch and Mekayim the Seudah. In other words, having it later in the day was purely practical because we were out and about. If we're going to be more homebound this year, no problem to make the Seudah earlier in the day. This is the ideal. Let's talk about the real. The Trumat Hadeshen comes and say, "Bahar bemek amot nahagu la'asot ikar seudat Purim ba'erev." Namely, they didn't do most of the Seudah during the day, but rather at night. This is what happened. Olchim lebet hakneset mipalalim mincha v'lo arvit. They daven mincha in shul. Chozrim lebatehem. They came home. Matchil b'seudah bayom. They started during the day before Shkia. V'nimshachim ba'ad halayla. And the Seudah went into the night. And here comes the clincher. V'rov ha'seudah hu b'layla. The majority of the meal was at night. And then he explains why. During that one day of Purim, there's so many things to do. You have to give matanot le'evyonim. You have to hear the Megillah. You have to give shalach manas. And therefore, in Pnai la'echol b'seudah b'simcha v'tanuk, they didn't have time to eat a proper Seudah till much, much later in the day. Plug that into many places that work on Purim. You're at work till you get home. You don't have time to eat the Seudah till a few minutes before Shkia. And because that was the reality, what should you do with the Seudah? Eretz Tzvi was a responsum written by Rav Tzvi Fromer, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Chachmei Lublin, and he writes something amazing. Minhag rov hahamon, the majority of people, sholchin manot achar tzeit kochavim. Purim's over, and they were still sending shalach manos when it's already dark. And it's not just a few people. Kamal Afim Yisrael Nagin came. There's about thousands that do this. And he ultimately says that maybe they're Yotze, because there's a famous machlokas regarding what's the reason for shalach manos. The Manot HaLevi, Rav Shlomo Alkabetz, who wrote Lechadodi, said that the idea is to increase camaraderie. People see that you send a care package and they say he's my friend. But according to the Trumat Hadeshen, the reason is to give people actual food for the Seudah. From this perspective, he says something amazing. He says that many a times we have a difference between the Kiyum mitzvah, how to do the mitzvah, and the reason for the mitzvah, what he calls the Tachlita mitzvah. For example, the reason for the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah is to learn from it. So the way to do it is to write a Sefer Torah, and the reason is to learn from it. So it comes along the Rosh in an amazing Chiddush and says today, how do we fulfill this mitzvah? By buying Sfarim, because we don't learn from a Sefer Torah. We only take it out for Kriyas HaTorah. We put it in an ark, and we make sure to lock it. we need the Svarim accessible, and therefore the Tachlit HaMitzvah, the goal of the mitzvah, sometimes dictates how to do the mitzvah. Therefore, comes along Rav Tzvi Fromer and says that maybe in this case it could be the same thing, even though the timing of the mitzvah is wrong. The goal is actually achieved because most people are eating the meal at the wrong time, namely after Purim. And that's when you give them the food for the meal. According to the Trumat HaDeshen, you fulfilled the goal of the mitzvah. And according to the Manot HaLevi, it's to increase camaraderie. You did. So, therefore, he says, and I quote his words, Chol shemitkayem tachlit ha-mitzvah, shapir dami, av shama seina bismana. As long as you fulfill the goal of the mitzvah, even though the timing is off, it's okay. Second point of view is, as long as you start the meal during the day, then even if you go into the night, it would be okay. It's based on Tosfot in two places that says, how can Bilam, way back when, know exactly the moment that God gets mad to curse the Jewish people? And the answer given by Rabbi Eliyahu in the Tosfot is, he just had to start the curse, and the curse would endure afterwards. Based on this, Rav Yosef Engel in Gilyonei Hashas, based on a Yerushalmi and this Tosfot, says that the same thing would be true regarding davening. Based on this Tosfot, is you start davening before the end of Zman Tefillah, before the 4th hour of the day. Say 10 o'clock in the morning is the cutoff time. You start davening at 9:58. As long as you started at the right time, even though you spill over into the wrong time, it would be okay. Based on this, the Trumat HaDeshen comes and says that since you start during the day at the right time, before Shkia, even though Ruba Seudah Ubalayla, it's a Chashiva Kol Seudah Achat, it's still considered one meal. The Chida, a Svaradi, comes along and says, Mishayahu chel belel Purim v'nimshach sudato ad hayom ve'achal tzat bayom yatsa. If you ate at night, and in some way or another you continue to eat through Alot HaShachar all the way through Netzach Hama, even though it's a problem regarding the laws of davening to eat before davening, but you did it, it's still okay because you ate part of it during the day. And that's what the Eretz HaTzvi says, Yitashev Minhag, Shematchil Seudat Purim Samuch Lachashecha, V'rov HaSeudah Ochlo B'Leil Tetvav. If you're living in a place in which you celebrate Purim on your Dalit, you started to eat before Shkia, but it goes into Tetvav, it would be okay. And he then quotes the holy tzaddik from Pshischa that says this is the reason why many Hasidim start davening when it's still Zman Tefillah, but they spill over into a time that they shouldn't be davening after the 4th hour of the day, and it's okay as long as you started at the right time. So that second point of view is you can start the meal a minute or two before Shkia, and even though the majority of the meal will be after Purim, it's still okay as long as you started at the right time. But the third point of view is the Ramah, and he says no dice. You have to not only start the meal during the day, but you have to have the majority of the meal eaten during the day before Shkia. And indeed, the Shut Eretz HaTzvi, even though, as we saw, he was trying to Melamed Zchut, comes along and says, why do you go into dire straits? Eat the meal, most of it, during the day. And therefore, my suggestion is very simple. If you see that your Seudah, quote unquote, is going to be much later in the day, and you won't eat the majority of it during the day, then in the morning, at work, eat bread and a little flesh during the day, and maybe even have a little wine, and that would be eating the Seudah during the day. When you go home and you have the more proper Seudah, then try to make it mostly before Shkia, and if you can, try to at least eat breakfast with a little, or lunch with a little flesh, and that would be Seudah during the day. And if not, then at least start before Shkia, so that you would at least begin the meal at the right time.